Oof, cold.
Why do some buildings survive for more than a century while others disappear?
Some buildings are like still and like they don't tilt over and like everyone likes those buildings. The other buildings that like are tilted over and like no one really likes it anymore, that's when they might tear it down.
Hey guys, I'm here at the corner of Dearborn and Jackson, just outside the Monadnock Building. It was built in the late 19th century and is appreciated still today for its clean lines and very simple facade. The really cool thing about it, it was built in Chicago when Chicago was experimenting with a whole bunch of innovative structural systems, and this ended up being the tallest masonry skyscraper ever built, even to this day. Largely because we learned how to build a lot more efficiently right after. I'll show clips of the south end of the building. The addition, which was built just a few years later, was built with a whole different structural system. Yeah, revolutionary building. Excited to sketch it.
So this is the Monadnock Building. It is right in the heart of Chicago on the intersection of Jackson and Dearborn Streets, primarily looking to the east. It's been divided into two parts, the North Tower and the South Tower, and that's important to the history, and we'll go over that in a little bit. But speaking to it architecturally and how it was designed, it has very soft corners. There's beautiful brickwork on both sides, both the north and south end of the building, and it's really simple. There's not a lot of decorations or adornments on the facade itself. Just a very clean, beautiful building. What's really interesting when you look at it, it's pretty tall. It's a 16-story building, and it was built at the end of the 19th century. Yeah, so the building was built originally in 1891 for the north half of the building. And it was constructed at a time when Chicago was kind of like a big laboratory. It was experimenting with a whole bunch of different types of building and structural systems. It was experimenting with a whole bunch of different types of building structural systems and just trying to push the buildings to be taller and taller and taller and more efficient. That was because it was really the center of the rail and center of industry here in the United States. A ton of goods were being put in here, a ton of money was being brought in, and they just needed to have downtown Chicago and the Loop to be as efficient and as booming as it possibly could. So there wasn't that much, they couldn't keep growing forever. They had a lake on one side and they had the railroads coming from the other, so they had to go up. At the time, right when the first half of the building was built, there was only one way to really build buildings, and it was by stacking masonry. So masonry is like brick and stone. It was stacking masonry like a pyramid up and up and up to get it taller. And if you think about the pyramid shape, it is really wide on the bottom and really narrow at the top. It's a pyramid. And even though all these years later, thousands of years later, when the Monadnock building was first built, they still stacked it and the base would be wider. And in order to get to the 16 stories, the bottom of the building had to be around 6 feet wide. So that's wider than I am tall. Just an incredibly thick base, all with brick. And it was revolutionary at the time. And still, no building has ever been built out of masonry that is as tall as the Monadnock building. That's because we innovated and got better and better. Even it was pushing the limits of that masonry construction, and it had to let go of things that just didn't matter. That the only thing that mattered was for it to be as tall as it possibly could. So they had to strip away the adornments, like I was saying. They had to round out the corners so that they were a lot softer to reduce stress points. And the architects, Burnham and Root, Daniel Burnham and John Root, two of the most famous architects in Chicago and at the world, they really were a pivotal part of the Chicago architectural movement. They designed this revolutionary masonry system and designed the tallest brick building ever constructed. And wouldn't you know it, the south end of the building was constructed a few years later. It was done by a different architecture firm called Holabird and Roche, and it Holabird and Roche, and it was built using a different structural system. It was built using steel framing, which allowed the walls to be a lot thinner, the building to be way more efficient, because if the walls are thinner, that means you could have bigger floor plates and rent out more of the building. And the windows got to be a lot bigger too. So it ended up being a lot more efficient of a building. And what makes the Monadnock Building just a really special use case is the building itself marks a turning point in construction and architecture. The first half was revolutionary building with masonry. The second half is pioneering a whole new construction type with steel framing that we're still using today, which gives we are improving and getting better and better. But that steel frame, that was a critical moment. And that's not that the story could have ended there. Just like my first video with the home insurance building, that was the first skyscraper that used a steel frame. That was the end of that story. That building eventually got torn down and replaced with a much bigger, newer building. But for the Monadnock Building, it still remains today. And that didn't just happen by accident. It was identified in the 30s, around the same time as the home insurance building. Around the same time as the home insurance building was being demolished, this building was also being looked at to be torn down and replaced with a newer building. But it was identified as a critical building in Chicago. And I'd like to think that they learned their lesson with the home insurance building and decided to, hey, let's renovate this guy, revolutionize everything on the guts, make sure that this is a whole new modern building for the time, for 1930s, and give this thing a new life. It was then sold in the 1970s to new owners after another 40 years, and they decided to go ahead and fully restore this thing back to its original condition. So clean up all the paint that's been building up over the years and the graffiti, and fix the brickwork and just make it a whole new building all over again. And it was added to the National Trust for Historical Preservation in 1986. So it has had a long and storied history for renovation and preservation, along with the really cool early stories it has had now. So it endures today. And while it marks the end of this kind of 1890s big boom in the loop in Chicago, this flip from masonry to steel frame, it also indicates how these kind of buildings, these historic buildings, can be used to define the city's character and serve as examples to, steward the past and kind of push everything forward.
If you'd like to see more stories like this, early skyscrapers, forgotten buildings, or architectural ideas that changed cities, let me know in the comments. What buildings would you like me to cover next?